Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest today.
I am Alyssa Cole. I am primarily a romance author. I write historical, sci-fi, and contemporary romance. And we are here today to talk about my debut thriller, When No One Is Watching.
So I loved it. It was so good. And when I tell people about it, I sort of say it's kind of like Get Out, but with gentrification.
Yeah.
And I mentioned before the interview, I don't want to give too much of it away because there's so much in this book, and it is so good. And it was such just a good thriller, but it did some things that I absolutely love in general, where a book will reference something that people should know about but don't know about, and it will put me down a research path. So Weeksville is something that I only found out about because I read this book, and I'm embarrassed that I never heard about it before.
I don't think you should be embarrassed. I lived near Weeksville, and I didn't know about it until years after I moved away. So part of the reason, behind this book, behind the story in this book, is that I lived in Brooklyn for most of my adult life. I was born in the Bronx. I grew up in the Bronx in Jersey City. And so kind of have witnessed the effects of gentrification. But my other thing, I guess, is history. I write historical romance in many eras of American history, and kind of just finding it's exactly that, finding all of these things that you didn't know, that you feel like you really should have known, and then you wonder, why did no one teach you these things? Because they're certainly more interesting than the things we got taught every year.
Seriously,
in social studies class.
The same things.
So kind of like, in a way, my history books and this book are some of my frustration about not learning these things and being like, okay, well, I can make stories, I can write stories about them, because I feel like these are all things that, deserve their own stories. And I can add, when I'm writing romance, I can add some kissing. When I'm writing thrillers, I can add some stress. And also, you have to read to find out, but maybe some kissing.
Maybe.
Maybe. But so yeah, in a way, obviously I love writing the stories, but I also really, there was a thing that, I had to read the first chapter of the book for recording and record it. And there's a line where Sydney is like, making people learn history they didn't want to know is fun. And I was like, oh. I was like, okay. I mean, I'm not Sydney, but that line is definitely maybe my tagline. I need to put it on my card or something.
You could, but it was certainly, it certainly was great and added so much, and really just, it was such a good book. So let's talk a little bit about like what it's about and the characters. So it is actually told from two perspectives. There is Sydney, who is the main character, and then, well, I guess, are they both the main characters?
Yes, I feel like they're both the main, but she's like the primary main.
Yeah. Yes.
If that makes sense.
So Sydney has grown up her entire life in Brooklyn.
Yes.
Yes, and gentrification, young white hipsters started moving into Brooklyn with their vegan bagel spreads. And I have a very good friend who was part of that. And, I recall visiting her a lot. She's now in California. And that was Park Slope. Sydney is it Prospect Park?
She's in kind of Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights, like a kind of an amalgamation of those, or somewhere near the border of those two neighborhoods.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So and as towards the end of my friend living in Park Slope, I think that those neighborhoods even because it became a point where my father, who was born in the Bronx, would be like, "Oh yeah, Park Slope used to be," and you'd be like, "Used to be what?" And he's like, "Oh, but now it's and I'm like, full of hipsters." And I love my friend to death. She's wonderful. But it was it was there, and you wouldn't know if you just kind of were dropped in a vacuum. But then her former roommate moved to Bed-Stuy, and my father's like, "Oh, Bed-Stuy." Is like, "Oh, I guess that's becoming full of hipsters." So but it's really just it's crazy how people's mindset about these places just change when they become full of white hipsters.
Yeah. And it's the thing, the book is about gentrification, but there are so many aspects of gentrification, and it's often not even just people moving in. It's when they move in, and for example, then rent goes up. So I've lived all over Brooklyn. I lived in I guess it was Park Slope, but the very edge down by the overpass, where all the used car lots were, and an illegal apartment. That was an apartment cut in half, and I didn't have a kitchen, and I didn't realize that until I moved in. So that kind of situation. I lived in Park Slope. I lived in Williamsburg. I lived in Fort Greene. When I first moved there, I lived in Crown Heights, and then I moved back to kind of Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights. And I kind of have, and plus, I have where my family lives. So kind of seeing all of the different aspects of it and the ways it can change neighborhoods for good things happen too, but also the negative side effects, such as, increased policing, not to protect the neighborhood, but to protect the value of the neighborhood for the new incoming people. Stores that are closing because the people who use those stores have to move away.
Yeah.
Or new stores popping up that are kind of out of the price range for people who have been living there forever. Property taxes going up, which I think is probably the biggest thing, because if people can still afford to live there who have bought the homes, they will find stores to go to, or stores will remain for them, things like that. But property taxes, which is probably one of the more insidious ways that gentrification affects neighborhoods, I feel like it's kind of the last pull of the crowbar to really get people out who are trying to stay.
Yeah.
But so there are all these aspects, and on the one hand, it's nothing stays the same. Neighborhoods change, cities change. That is sorry, rooster.
I think it's charming that I'm like, "Oh, she has a rooster," but I wasn't sure if I should mention it.
There are many of them, and they show up on any recording.
That's cool. I love it.
There are roosters, and there are roosters that are not, just in the general neighborhood.
Oh, very cool. Where are you recording out of right now?
So I live in Martinique. I live it's in the Caribbean. So it's French. So I moved from Brooklyn to here after I got married because my husband was living here. So a big change. A big change. Yeah. No, I mean, there were I will say there were chickens in Brooklyn because of hipsters. But although, to be fair,
are you sure the chickens weren't actual hipsters?
to be fair, when I was growing up, people had roosters too, but they were not hipsters. They were people who moved here and were like, hey, I live in a city, but I'm still gonna have some chickens and some eggs. So again, it's a cycle of things.
Yeah.
Because, you know, hipsters making chickens a thing when in fact it's just normal rural life.
Yeah.
Except like the chickens had prettier chicken houses in Brooklyn. And we're spreading salmonella because people were kissing them.
Wow.
I don't kiss my chickens. Our chickens are very cute, but I don't kiss them.
That's okay.
Maybe my husband does when I'm not looking, but you know, I'm
Yeah.
gonna.
When no one's watching, he kisses his
Yes.
chickens. So your book came up in a program we did recently with Kit Rocha, Donna, and Bree.
Yeah, my friend.
Somebody asked them what some of their favorite upcoming speculative fiction books are, and yours, when no one was watching, is the first one that they said. But then, you know, we were all talking because I was like, I read it, it was fabulous, but is it really speculative fiction? So kind of getting back to it, okay, so Sydney, she lives in this area, this Bed-Stuy area. She lives in the house that she grew up in after a failed marriage. She's still reeling from it. She has her best friend, Drea, and people are calling for her mother, who is not in the picture, who's off screen, is what I'm going to say. And she's still like, she's brokenhearted, and she gets like, she's when you first meet her, she's taking a tour of her own neighborhood, and there's like a historical tour, and nobody's mentioning any of I guess the facts, like, you know, that there's prominent Black history in her neighborhood. So she takes it upon herself to mention that.
Yeah. So I kind of, and that part, you know, and I wasn't even really thinking about this, but I was talking to, I think, my mom the other day, but then I remembered that, like, a few years ago when I was at home, my mom was telling me that there were historical tours of our neighborhood, and I was like, for what? And then I was just kind of like, that's weird. But so I think somewhere in the back of my mind, there was that grain of like, I mean, obviously I love history, so I would love historical tours, but kind of, you know, who shapes that history, who is acknowledged in that history. And I think, at least in the book for Sydney, it's a way for her to kind of grab hold of something that she can control while the rest of her life is out of control, and to assert herself in a way that she hasn't asserted herself before, really. And then, you know, of course, her neighbor, across the street neighbor, gets into the mix by volunteering to help her with the tour. And, you know, things proceed from there.
Things escalate from there. So she actually, so there's two neighbors. So there's Kim, who...
Yes, Theo and Kim, who are a couple who have moved in, couple-ish. It's complicated. You know, they're basically broken up at the beginning of the book, though they have bought this house together. Theo's kind of like, Theo's, actually, now that I think about it, Theo's the wife in the attic.
He really is, though. Like, he's literally the wife in the attic.
And he's kind of just trying to hang in there and hope that things will work out. He has his own layered background that has contributed to him just thinking that hanging out in a boiling hot attic as your relationship crumbles is, you know, a great way to handle life. So there's Theo, and then there's Kim, who was his fiance and is, you know, kind of not a great person.
No, she's terrible.
And he had kind of, she's rich. She comes from a rich family. Theo does not. And he kind of put her on a pedestal, and then realized that both she and the pedestal were not good at all.
No, it seems to me like, because Theo, and he, like you said, he has a layered background. He comes from, I guess, a poor background himself, and she's, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, like she's got like a trust fund and this family that goes to like the Hamptons, and it seems like in a way she picked him because he was like shiny and new and like exciting because he wasn't part of that world, but then she kind of came around to he's not part of that world, and this isn't what I really want, so I'm just gonna discard him in the attic and make life miserable for him. But he's so he goes on the tour, and that's where he meets Sydney. And the two of them, there's this like it's almost like a neighborhood message board. And there's different things going up in the neighborhood message board. There's the people who've been there for decades and they're talking about block parties. And then there's the people who moved there who are talking about these kids who are riding around in their bikes and what are they even doing riding around on their bikes. And Kim is one of those people, and then there's these two other people. And then as a side note, there's as Sydney calls him Bill, William, is it William Bilson?
Yes.
I love that.
the real estate agent, I guess, who's kind of going around handing out cards, seeing if there's anyone who's willing to sell their house. And like with all of these characters, I was kind of trying to convey, and it obviously I couldn't convey like everyone's, but I was trying to convey a broad swath of the class and, race, class, economic status, and also how people move in a neighborhood and interact with one another. People who have been there for a long time and are just kind of trying to maintain the neighborly aspect of Gifford Place where they live. Then there are the new people who moved in who are trying to also, maybe get into the neighborly stuff and who are generally cool. Then there are the people who are pretending to be neighborly, but who really are kind of like, I'm just waiting for these people to get priced out of here. And then, Bill, because, and also just kind of, and like between Theo, Sydney, and Kim, kind of this is more like in retrospect thinking about it, but like Kim represents generational wealth.
Yeah.
And the generational wealth that many white Americans, even if they, don't, and I mean, white Europeans too, don't really think about, because it's kind of normal in their families for people to, even if they don't have a huge trust fund, okay, well, grandma is passing away and then we're gonna sell her house and split it. And then Sydney is kind of, her mom came up from the South. She owns her own home in this neighborhood, predominantly Black neighborhood of people who own their own homes and kind of have made this space for themselves. But how America is always kind of trying to, at the same, like in a way, it's about the gaslighting nature of being a Black person in America, because on the one hand there's the American dream, and you have to buy a house, you have to have good credit, you have to do this and that, but then at the same time constantly sabotaging Black Americans who are trying to do this, like
redlining.
Redlining, laws that don't allow people to pass pass property down to their children, like, older laws. And then how those older laws change to become less obvious, but still pretty obvious. And you know, in a way this is about like conspiracy and all that, but it's all rooted in real things that happen.
And
I'm
well
like,
documented
okay,
too.
yeah, but kind of just get swept under the rug, or they're kind of, it's just done and people don't, when no one is watching is a bit in reference to that like all of these things happen. And we can see it now with, you know, for example, this week alone, there's been like how many attempts to write, but in a way we're seeing the the USPS,
Yeah.
which I will mention is one of the, like, it's something like 50% of their employees are African American. So that's another layer to that, why it's being dismantled. But in addition to voter fraud. But so we're seeing these things happen. There are mailboxes on the backs of trucks. The president literally saying, well, yeah, I'm trying to mess this up before the election. But it's like we're seeing, but like not watching. I don't know, like
I know, it's all,
it's happening. We're vaguely aware it's happening, or we're very aware that it's happening. And you know, this book in a way is kind of just a response to these things that happen and you feel powerless against, I guess. So it's kind of a catharsis on some level of like, no, you're not. You're not, you know, you're being gaslit.
yeah.
This society has, the rooster very strongly agrees with me on this. Yes. You know, society is kind of set up to make people feel that they're not doing enough as they pull the rug out from under you. And then Theo comes from another side of that, of like an extremely, his family's never owned a home. He lived with the mom who was constantly, you know, getting into abusive relationships, so that he doesn't really know what a real relationship is supposed to be like. So when Kim started, and I kind of wanted to address that too with, you know, how masculinity can often be portrayed in books. Like, I won't go too much into Theo's story, but clearly he has one aspect of traditional masculinity, but on the other hand, he has also dealt with this kind of witnessing and being part of abuse and domestic violence. And you know, there are different ways people can react to that. They can relive the cycle, but he doesn't necessarily have to relive the cycle as an abuser.
Yeah.
So kind of with Theo, I was kind of trying to show the different ways that abuse can affect people, and affect their, and with Sydney too, who has come out of her marriage, how it can affect how people, you know, approach relationships.
Yeah.
Because you know, they both have, like, in the one way that this differs from a romance is that they're a bit more morally ambiguous.
Yeah.
But also I feel like a lot of there's more uncertainty about their relationship, but at the same time, I tried to make it as realistic as possible in this setting of two people who are kind of messed up, being like, oh, which I guess is the same in my romances too. Just two people who kind of have these issues and be like, well, our issues maybe go well together. Not like, okay, we're gonna get rid of these. In this book,
Yeah.
they're less interested in working through their issues. They have other things going on.
They certainly do. And I want to get back to Weeksville, which I mentioned very briefly in the beginning of this. So he decides that he's going to help her put together her tour. And they go to, and first of all, he comes out, like, they're going to go to the Historical Society of Weeksville, which is immediately when I was like, okay, time to do my research. Oh, wow. But of course, like, Theo comes out, and it was such a great scene. He comes out wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt, and she's just like, okay, turn that inside out, because we are not going here with you. Where, like, I'm not going to be like walking into this place with the white guy wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt. And like, he thinks it's helping, but Sydney's just like, listen.
Yeah, and
no.
I mean, this has become, you know, particularly, I feel like, pertinent in the current moment. Unfortunately, a lot of things in the book have, but I feel like, you know, and part of the thing I was like, I don't want to discourage people from wearing those shirts, given the moment now versus the moment when I wrote it.
Of
But
course.
I think part of the thing in the book is that she can see that it's disingenuous, and he's kind of just,
like I'm
being
gonna go hang
performative.
out with my black neighbor, going to a historical site, with and wear this big black, and it's like it's very much like showcase. It's like showcasing. Like, like, listen, like, if you're there to support me and do the work, support me and do the work and learn, but you don't have to, like, you're not going to a protest, you're not, with like your peers. Like, the statement you should be making is, I'm here to learn, listen, and go help you with this, because this is what I agreed to do. And that's kind of how, that's how I read it.
Yeah. And like, so that was just a funny scene to me, because thank you. Like, I try to, and like with most of my stuff, even if I'm gonna have dark stuff, I really try to have some humor in there, because I feel like, most people, even if they're sad, even if they're grieving, when you go to a funeral, people are still laughing. Not during the service, obviously, but like after, when they're talking, thinking about memories or catching up with people they haven't seen, because it's not healthy to just move through life without any humor. And in a way, you have to, even when you're, especially when you're writing darker things. Like, I didn't want this to be a book that people were too depressed to go through it while they're reading. So when I have dark things, I really do try to have moments of levity, moments of just funny things to kind of lighten the mood and make it, tolerable. Just how laughter makes life tolerable. So
it was fabulous. So while Theo is helping and learning more, there's a whole other aspect to it, which is where the whole Get Out reference comes, and that's not what I want to go into, because people really need to read it to get it.
Read it.
Yes, read it. But there's really just there's so much, and there's so much to the book, and so much, and there is the whole idea of Bill, he's working, and at first you're just like, oh, he's just that annoying realtor, but he is part of the whole thing. He wants to make money, and he knows this is a place that it's fresh for people to push people out. And like I said, every time I want to give something away, I don't. So I guess, like, really quickly, let's end it with a historical fact that people are going to learn about in this book. Let's end it with Weeksville. We began it with Weeksville. Let's end it with Weeksville.
So it was founded in Brooklyn, and there are still 3 of the houses there from the settlement, from the neighborhood. And they had a school, they had an orphanage, they had stores. So Weeksville was a neighborhood founded by 3 African Americans in 1838. But basically, it was around this time period where you needed to have land to vote, basically, to have a say in anything. And obviously, people wanted to have property to protect themselves. And it was bought after the Panic of 1837, I believe, where in the Panic of 1837 was caused by, stuff dealing with slavery and people. So, and the book also kind of tries to make the connection between slavery and the North, because a lot of people don't make those connections. There was slavery in the North. It ended a bit earlier in some ways, or transmuted to something else. But, the rich, all of those fancy houses and, beautiful buildings, the money came from somewhere.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is the same thing, like that happens with historical romance and dukes and all of that. And I love reading about some dukes, but that money came from somewhere. It came from where I am now, the Caribbean, or from, India and South Asia, and China. okay, so we're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but basically Weeksville was, people were, after all, the rich people started to lose their money because of, slavery related reasons. They had to sell these plots of land, and some people bought plots of land, and then free Black men were able to buy some of them. And so it was this settlement that was created and eventually disappeared, which is discussed in the book. But they have these 3 houses that remain, and the center, what museum was built around those houses, and you can go tour them. And actually, I did go tour them. And while I was there, I met a librarian. She was from the Brooklyn Library.
Oh, nice.
And but it was also, while I was there, someone whose grandmother lived in the neighborhood was on the tour, and she was like having these very emotional moments because her grandmother had told her about this neighborhood. So that's how close this history is. Like, and the grandchild, she wasn't like an elderly woman.
Yeah.
she was, I mean, maybe 60 something. She was there with her daughter, or either her daughter or her granddaughter, but she was relatively young.
Younger than my parents.
Yeah, like she was basically around the same age as my parents, and maybe younger. And she was being like, yeah, my grandmother told me about this, and for me that was just like this is as I was doing research for the book, but I was really like, wow, like, I mean, I know this is partially the point of the book, which is, the old Faulkner quote, to paraphrase, the past isn't even the past. But like, this woman right here is standing where her grandmother grew up. And that was just like so wild to me. But so you can tour the houses, you can see exhibitions. The ones in the book are made up, but they have exhibitions, they have art. And it's kind of, like I said, I lived near it for years and I didn't know it was there. And I think now more people know it's there, but it's just kind of this thing. And kind of one of the things about history and, New York and Brooklyn history, it's like you also think about Central Park, which is also built over an African American neighborhood that they basically used like historical eminent domain to get the people out of there. And then, so you go to Central Park, you're hanging out on the Great Lawn, and that's where people used to live. Obviously, they wouldn't be living there now. It's like 102 years later. But like, it's this beautiful, and I think that's part of New York history and American history.
Yeah.
And just imperial history of going places, and then, okay, yes, we have this beautiful park, or we have these giant skyscrapers, or we have these like beautiful brownstones. But someone along the line was displaced, was possibly had their entire future changed by that move. And, one of the things that I kept thinking about as I was writing this was just like timelines, generational, and for me, a lot of it, I don't think I went super deeply into it in the book, but generational wealth and how that completely changes where people can go in life. So, if you have 2 people on a timeline, one person's family is forced to give up their money, basically all of their savings, every generation or every other generation, and the other family is accumulating this whole time. Even if in 2020 the other family isn't super rich, they have had an entirely different background than the family that was forced to basically start from negative every generation and has never been able to have a stable foundation for their family to build wealth on. And so these are the things that I think about when, we talk about policies and, financial education and things like that. I think financial education is great, but it's also more than that. It's literally the system stealing money from people every generation or so, and then being like, oh, why don't you have any money? Like, so like, maybe you need to read a book about it, and it's like, no, you need to stop stealing people's money. So yeah, that's kind of the gist.
It's a fabulous book, and it is a thriller. I mean, it's a thriller where you'll learn things. It's a thriller where you'll definitely feel things. It's got like, I want to see it as a movie or like a Netflix series.
I think that would be fun. I already know who I would want for Sydney.
Do you want to say, or should we?
I mean, obviously, if it becomes a movie and at some point someone listens to this and is like, she didn't want me, there are a lot of people that I would like. But I think Nikki Bahari would do a great job from Sleepy Hollow and from
Oh,
Miss
that would be
June.
really good. Yeah.
She just has like a really good range of micro emotion that I feel like would be good for this role of having to go, you know, fly between pretending you're okay to not being okay to trying to pull it together. I think she would be great for the role.
And you're coming out with another book soon about an AI.
Oh, that book is out already.
Oh, it is out already.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. The AI Who Loved Me. I mean, it's out in ebook. It's not.
Okay.
I have to put the print book out, and then it will be available in libraries. In the.
Exciting.
And that
Switching
book,
gears.
Yes, that book is about a woman who. That one is like kind of spec fic sci-fi. Woman in a near future who works for the government, which is also kind of like a privatized thing at that point. And her job is, she was in an accident, so she can't work at her building anymore, but she drives virtual cars from home, like cars that are supposedly driven by artificial intelligence, which I thought I was being like extremely cynical. And then after the book came out, I found out that there are services where this happens, but it's not like actual, it's like those little delivery, like there are these delivery robots. But and I was like, wow, okay. But apparently, so then a hot guy moves in next door, her neighbor's nephew. Something happens to, and he's just a bit weird. Something happens to the neighbor, and she decides to start looking out for him, and finds out that he is a robot.
Awesome.
He is a biosynthetic human. So, and then things take off from there. It's like a sci-fi rom-com thriller.
It sounds good,
and together.
It sounds really, really good. And I think like I've been reading thrillers nonstop during, I'm going to say the last like few years, but specifically the pandemic. I have just like upped my thriller reading, and I'm not sure, like some people are like, I have to read something soothing, but I can't. I have to read something that's just going to keep my mind going. And sort of, you know, like the thing about thrillers is that there's always, no matter how crazy things get, there's always an ending.
Yeah.
And there's comfort in that.
Yeah.
But I really want to read this book. Maybe it'll be a little bit of a palate cleanser to all of the awful things I've been reading about.
It is a little, I mean, like, it's one of those things where there's like bad stuff happening, but mostly in the background of the world.
Right.
They are kind of, it's like in a rom-com little bubble, and then the bubble starts to expand, and you're like, maybe not all is not, but you know, it does have a good, nothing too terrible happens in the book, and you know, it's a romance. It has a happy ending that will leave you feeling happy, hopefully.
The rooster agrees.
Yes. The rooster will be, I'm gonna add the rooster to the sequel. So.
Oh, he has to be there. Well, thank you so much for interviewing with us. This was awesome. Everybody should read When No One's Watching. It is so, so good. I'm going to be pulling for that Netflix series because it would be great. Are you looking to revisit that story, or is it finished?
I think it's finished for now. I do have other thrillers I want to write. I left it open-ended in case I wanted to return to that world.
Yeah, I was just remembering. I'm like, there was like a door, like not even a door open, like a window cracked.
Yes.
That like, hey, we could talk more about this, but maybe we will, maybe we won't.
I mean, I have ideas for what would happen if I did go back, but I also have other things that I am excited to work on too. So maybe one day.
Awesome. All right. When No One Is Watching is available in September of 2020, which is around the corner from the time I am recording this, and probably will be when this is released. So please go to your library, go to bookstore.org, wherever it is available, read it. And I am going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.